So today we're going to talk about the Toyota 2JZ engine. It's an extremely famous engine for being able to easily make 1,000 horsepower on the stock bottom end. Up until last year, you could get a 2JZ GTE imported from Japan for around $3,000, which is still really expensive. But in 2020, the price jumped to $6,000 or more. It's definitely not a budget engine, especially when compared to popular choices like the LS V8. But there is a cheaper option, way cheaper, the 2JZ GE, which is what these engines right here are. You could find the GE in the States in cars like the SC300, GS300, and IS300. They're not always easy to find, but you can pull one yourself from a junkyard for about $300 depending on the junkyard's prices, or you can find a junkyard that already has one pulled for $500 to $600. That's a huge difference in price. That saves you almost $5,500. Now, some people say you have to spend more money to build a GE, and so it's not really worth it over the price of a GTE. That's really only true if you're planning on using the GTE in its stock form with the stock twin turbos and being maxed out at around 450 horsepower. If you're trying to go for more horsepower than that, then the same upgrades you're going to do to the GE you would also be doing to the GTE, like turbo manifold, bigger single turbo, bigger injectors, things like that. So at that point, all of those upgrades are a wash. And now that the GTEs are $6,000 or more, it's definitely cheaper to build a GE. To break down the difference in price, if we were to build a GTE and say we're going for 500 to 600 horsepower, we're gonna have to rip off the stock twin turbos, get a single turbo manifold, a bigger single turbo, injectors, some sort of ECU or piggyback to control the fuel, and all kinds of other mods. To build a GE for 500 to 600 horsepower, we have to buy a turbo manifold, turbo, intercooler and piping, bigger injectors, a GTE head gasket, and a standalone ECU. So to buy all the parts that you would need to build the 2JZ GE, you could buy them from anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 or more. With the $500 engine, you're now looking at a total of $3,000 to $4,000 to have a complete engine. So with that being said, there's still a lot of people who swear by the GTE and would always use it over the GE. Now there are some advantages to the GTE. For one, it has turbos from the factory, but 99% of people aren't going to use those anyways. It also has oil squirters in the pistons to help keep the pistons cool. It has a thicker head gasket for lower compression, and it has bigger injectors and things to support the turbos like oil lines already in the engine. But there's a lot of people who actually use a GE bottom end with a GTE head, and that eliminates the oil squirters. The theory behind that is the oil pressure is more consistent without the squirters. So even though everyone says, oh, you gotta have the oil squirters, that's not necessarily true. I think Adam LZ runs a GE bottom end with no oil squirters in his Formula Drift S15. So if you don't care about the oil squirters, there's really no major difference. So you've decided you're gonna build a 2JZ NAT, as they call it, which basically is a GE with a turbo. Now you have two major choices, because there's two different versions of the GE engine. You have non-VVTI and VVTI. Now the non-VVTI came in the earlier models pre-98 in the GS300 and SC300. The bottom end in the non-VVTI is just as strong as the GTE, supposedly. The rods are the same, the pistons are different but just as strong. But the non-VVTI has a distributor instead of coil on plug, which can be a problem if you're trying to fit a big turbo on here. And it doesn't have VVTI. VVTI, if you didn't know, is variable cam timing. And you can tell if the engine has VVTI because there's this hump right here. This is the intake cam that is variable. The exhaust cam is not variable. And what the VVTI does basically is add torque in the low range of your power band, which in drifting is huge. And the VVTI can make a big difference, like 80 to 100 pound-feet of torque below like 4,500 RPM. But the major difference, it's got VVTI and it also has coil on plug, no distributor, which nobody wants a distributor anyways. They're old school, they suck. put some coils on the plugs, be good to go, have good ignition, and not have to worry about that. The only downside to the VVTI engine is the rods, the piston rods are much thinner, they're really weak. So the non-VBTI block, the bottom end, can easily support 700 horsepower. People do it all the time. But the VVTI bottom end with the weaker rods maxes out around 350 to 400 horsepower, which is not a ton over the stock power of a GTE. So we really don't want those rods. So you want VVTI and you want coil on plug, but you don't want the weak rods. There's two options to solve that problem. Either you can buy new rods and install them in the VVTI engine, and then you can easily make 700 horsepower no problem. Or what I'm gonna do, which is why I have the two engines sitting here, you can take the head off of the VVTI engine and put it on the non-VVTI block. It bolts right up, everything works, and you just have to convert all of the parts over then and do all your turbo stuff. To sum it up, if you want to build a 2JZ for really cheap and make over 500 horsepower, you can buy a non-VVTI engine, deal with the distributor or get rid of the distributor. The problem with that is because this engine has a distributor, it does not have a cam angle sensor or a crank sensor, so you would have to add those, potentially weld a bung into the head for the cam sensor. You can use a VVTI oil pump to get your crank sensor. But if you didn't want to deal with all of that, you could keep the distributor, put a small turbo on it, upgrade the fuel system, and make 500 plus, no problem. That's probably the simplest solution, but I don't know about you. I don't want this ugly distributor in my car. It ruins the entire look of these 2JZs, and I'd rather have VVTI. So if you want to build a 500 plus horsepower VVTI 2JZ GE, all you have to do is buy two engines from a junkyard. These engines are really reliable. They don't have many part failures, so I'd say probably 90% of the time, if you go to a junkyard and find an engine that at least turns freely, you're gonna get one that'll be just fine. You're taking it apart and putting a new head gasket on it anyways, which is one of the biggest failures. So you can pick up two of these engines. I got this one. I pulled this one myself and got it for $300. But I could not find any pull your own junkyards that had the non-VVTI, so I had to go to a junkyard that already had this one pulled, so I ended up paying $550 for this one. So all in all, we've got about $850. We can take the head off of this one, put it on that bottom end with a GTE head gasket, which is thicker and will lower our compression for turbo application. And then at that point, you have an engine that is ready to be turboed. That will be a whole nother episode. I am planning on doing a whole series about these engines and swapping them into my BMW E36. So if you want to know more about that and how to turbo them, I'm going to do a very in-depth series on that. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn notifications on so you can get notified when I post those. Probably won't be for a while because I'm not going to release those until the entire project is done and I can go back and make sure that I didn't give any false information that I figured out was wrong throughout the process of the build. But other than that, now you know you can easily build a 2JZ for cheap. You don't have to go out and spend $6,000 just on the engine before you even upgrade it to a single turbo, which is ridiculous. Hope to see you guys in the future. Peace.